I'm going to go over three of the most common fallacies that I have encountered since I've started doing philosophy. A fallacy is an error in reasoning. Now, we don't want to commit errors in reasoning because errors in reasoning lead to false statements. And we don't want to do false statements because if we delve into things that are false, it can harm us. As Socrates said, it can harm our body, but most of all, it can harm our mind. So we want to stay away from things that are false. So in other words, we want to stay away from doing fallacies. We want to be able to spot them. And we want to be able to know them so that we don't commit them. So the first fallacy I'm going to go over is known as the red herring. Now the red herring was the most difficult for me personally. And it's one of the first fallacies that I encountered when I started doing arguments, especially against people. The red herring involves somebody bringing in an issue that you were not originally talking about. First of all, a red herring is this big, ugly, smelly fish, and you can drag it in front of a dog to knock off the scent, knock off the trail. All right? People do this in argument all the time. Let's say you're arguing about euthanasia, whether it's morally wrong or morally good. And then you give your argument, but the opponent says, well, you know what? I think it should be taxed. We should tax the event. You see this? That was maybe a little subtle. You weren't talking about taxing it. You were talking about whether it was morally good or bad. So this is the red herring, and a lot of times they come a little bit more sneaky than that. But that was more of an obvious one so that you can understand what it is. So that's number one, the red herring. And how to counter that is just to merely keep your opponent on track, right? You bring them back to the original issue when they commit this fallacy. Normally, what you don't want to do with the fallacies, most of the time you don't want to point out their fallacy, okay? Because this can be somewhat, because when people do this, it can be confrontational, like, oh, I got you. Right? And that pretty much ends the argument because the other person gets offended, runs away, or whatever. Okay? So what you want to do is you want to be helpful. You want to bring them back on focus to what you were talking about. If you read the dialogues of Plato, Socrates does this the best. He will bring people, his opponents, back to the original issue that they were talking about. So that's what you would want to do here. With the second fallacy, it is known as the ad hominem. Now, ad hominem, it's Latin for towards the person. Okay, so an ad hominem involves a personal attack. So let's say that you are arguing about, let's say, euthanasia again, and you give your argument of why it's wrong or right. So you lay your argument down, and then the opponent kind of they don't really know how to respond. So they say, well, you know what? I think that's just false because, you know, I don't like how you're dressed. You're dressed very ugly today. Obviously, that doesn't make any sense, right? Obviously, there's something wrong with that type of argumentation. What's wrong with it? They're not addressing your argument. That's what's wrong with all these fallacies. All these fallacies, their commonality is they don't address the argument. The red herring doesn't address the original issue. The ad hominem attacks the person without addressing the original issue. That's what's wrong with it. And it also can be very mean and might get you in a real fight. So you want to stay away from the ad hominem. And it doesn't just have to be as obvious as what I just said. An ad hominem can be if you attack or you point out in response to an argument, you point out, oh, you really don't understand this because, you know, you don't have your master's degree, right? You know what? You went to this college over here, and that's probably why you don't understand what I'm talking about. That's why you don't agree with my conclusion, right? That is ad hominem because you're attacking the individual. You're attacking the circumstances of the individual, okay? So that one is also ad hominem, personal attack. All right. So the third fallacy I'm going to go into is known as the straw man. Now the straw man is when somebody restates your argument in a weaker way than you yourself stated it. Okay? Somebody would normally do this because they cannot deal with the original argument. So they reformulate the original argument into something they can deal with. In other words, they build their own straw man. Is a straw man weak or strong? A straw man is weak. You can easily tear it down. So the opponent makes a straw man and then they tear that down. They don't tear down the original argument. So what's wrong with this? The same thing that was wrong with the other ones. They're not dealing with the real argument. They're dealing with their own construction. Now, I have to point this out. If your opponent makes your original argument stronger than what it was, that's not straw man. One great philosopher, Thomas Aquinas, he did this the best. He would reformulate the opponent's argument in a stronger way than what they gave. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually being very fair in a good way to argue. Okay, because if your goal is the truth, you do want the best argument someone can give. But that's not the straw man. The straw man is stating somebody's argument in a weaker way than what they gave it so that you can just tear that apart.